Board and the Affordable Housing Committee. It is 4:30 on December 19th, 2023. And both the trust has a quorum present in the room, and the committee does. But I will give you the webinar joint information in case someone else wants to join. https://us02web.zoom.us/j/8948156786. And if you want to come in by telephone, 1-646-558-8656. The ID number 894-8156-7866. And with that, I will call the meeting of the trust to order. Nancy?
I'll call the meeting of the Affordable Housing Committee to order.
Thank you. I'm going to make one change in our agenda because the principal item is deliverable number 5, but we want to have two relatively quick updates from Rio Sacchetti at Penrose and David Quinn at 107 Main Street because they don't need to sit through a discussion of deliverable number 5. So Rio, let me come to you first. Can you give us whatever good news you have?
Hi, Mr. Chair and Board. Thanks for inviting me again tonight. So we're still in the process of closing on the financing. Right now, we have a closing scheduled for this Thursday. There's still a lot of moving pieces, but we have finally received our approval from HUD. HUD's involved on a couple different aspects of the project. So we needed to go get a certain approval from them, which has finally come in. And right now we are, because we have over 15 different funding sources, we're closing in escrow. So we've already had signature pages from most of the different financing partners and we're just wrapping up, doing some last minute wrap up on some open documents on the mass housing side. And so that way I say, we're tentatively scheduled for closing on Thursday because there's so many parties involved. It can, that date can change based on certain deliverables. It's tough to nail down a specific day, but everyone's pretty much on the group on the financing side is committed to getting this closed before the holidays so we can start construction right away, right after New Year's. And that would be the plan. So if we do close this Thursday, we'll issue a notice to the contractor to begin construction. That probably likely won't start until after New Year's for, reasons that it's difficult to mobilize when a lot of people are on vacation. And we would start working on the foundations. It's not a great time of year to start working on foundations, even though a lot of the work is on the a lot of the project involves the existing building. There's a new addition, and there's the 2 new townhomes, which would require new foundations, as well as we would start with some of the, the site grading and the utility work. It's a 16-month construction schedule still, and yes, so that's it. I guess I can't recall if I said this at the last meeting, but we got an award of additional state tax credits from EOHLC, the formerly Massachusetts DHCD is now EOHLC. We just had found an investor for that a couple weeks ago, and that's on board. And they, but we're still working on the ARPA. The ARPA funds haven't come in yet, so that would be that would likely post closing on all the other financing. And if we are able to get the ARPA funds from Barnstable County, that would be used on the construction costs.
Okay, Rio, thank you. Just for everybody else here, George and I were on the phone with Mike Ford today, dealing with sort of some final pieces on this, and I think that Mike and counsel for the various entities representing Penrose and other lending agencies have got all the pieces sorted out, so Thursday may really happen. So
Great.
that's congratulations. It's always fun to get to that point, but the number of participants complicates a real estate deal like this. Have a happy holiday, Rio.
Thank you. You too.
David, 107?
All right. Good evening, everyone. David Quinn with Housing Assistance Corporation. So 107 Main Street is also in the closing process. We're currently targeting a March closing. And so actually we had a call today with kind of a kickoff call with all of the funders on board. So that is Town of Orleans, Town of Brewster, Town of Eastham, Barnstable County, ARPA funds, which were approved at the County Commissioners meeting last week or 2 weeks ago, I believe, officially voted on. So that's a done deal now. Mass Development and Eastern Bank are our main first mortgage investors, lenders on this. And then also had EOHLC and Mass Housing, who are administering the state funding sources. So similar to Rio's update, we have a lot of funding sources involved, and we are going through that process. Our team's also taking a trip down to the modular factory in a couple weeks, the second week of January, with the architect and builder to tour the factory, meet with the team down there, and kind of go through the logistics and the process for how that'll work and be delivered to the site. So it's really starting to happen, and we're just kind of working as hard as we can behind the scenes to get this thing closed.
Thank you, David.
So, thank you.
Just to remind everybody on the trust, there are two pieces of funding that come from the town of Orleans. One, the trust in September of 2021 voted $876,624. And then the Board of Selectmen at the same meeting voted to request the CPC for $1 million bond issue. Both of those sources have been approved, and George and I were with Mike Ford today sorting out how the grant agreements will be executed as part of this closing process. So one interesting thing is that this money will be advanced as needed by the contractor. So we will have a series of releases as we go along, but it is secured, permanently affordable housing. Okay? David, thank you. Keep up the
Thank
good
you.
work. 2024 is almost here. All right, let's go back to item number 2 with Laura, and review deliverable number 5, housing needs assessment.
Hi, thank you. So I have one new and final sort of piece of the housing plan puzzle to discuss with you tonight, which is on the data needs and indicators and reporting calendar piece. And then we also have a suggested change to the production goal to discuss with you all, and hopefully we can settle on a final aspirational number to put in the plan. But let me just start with the reporting calendar and data indicators page. So I'll share it on my screen, but hopefully you also have a printed version that you can refer to as well, so you don't have to squint and see the text. There's a couple ways this is broken down. One is by goal, so trying to have some sort of metric track related to each goal, which may or may not relate to an actual piece of data like from the census. So for example, production, you're tracking the net new year-round missing middle housing units. For goal 1, you're just tracking to see if there's zoning bylaw passed, similar for a couple of, the other zoning related goals. You're creating more deed restricted affordable housing, serving low income households. So that would just be your subsidized housing inventory. there is trying to incentivize the development and preservation of financially attainable year-round rentals. There's a couple strategies related to that. So you might look at either the number of ADUs, accessory dwelling units, which it's a little fuzzy to me how that's currently, maybe you can help clarify this for me, how it's tracked now in the town, whether that's something that someone would go to the building department to get a building permit for, zoning board of appeals, maybe the assessor's data can have some track record of what's been created so far. And then I know you're working on creating some sort of town-wide rental registry, so that could be a great resource moving forward to get a more precise number for your year-round rentals. But that is a piece of data in the data indicator section that you can get an estimate for, the sort of standard data for, which is from American Community Survey or census data. So I'll pause there on the ADUs. I just want to see if I can get some clarity on the best data source for accessory dwelling units in the town currently.
Where did I get that from?
Everybody's looking for George Meservey, who's downstairs at a planning board meeting. So
Okay.
if the question, I think, was, how do you get information on ADUs?
Yes, I put in my assumption, but I'm not 100% sure, right, that is correct for Orleans. Some communities don't even actually keep track of this. I'm assuming that Orleans does.
Sort of. The bylaw says you can have an ADU, and there's a requirement that you file annually with the building commissioner. I'm not
Okay.
sure that such a file exists, or if it does, if it's up to date. So if George were in the room, he'd say we have 2 to 3 to 4 ADUs a year.
Right.
But no one has actually sat down to look at the building permits to determine what that number is. So it needs some
Okay,
work.
I might have to follow up with George. Is it a paper file system, or is it like a Excel, or maybe that's a staff question?
I think it's pretty basic paper, if there's anything written on the paper.
Okay. Yeah, all right. So it sounds like this is pretty accurate. It would still be the building department, and
Yes.
you could probably request some sort of report for them, and maybe a little bit, of a pain for them to track those numbers down, but whether you are at least tracking and moving forward is probably easier than trying to retroactively understand what's there, but maybe that's a good exercise for, even an intern or something, moving forward. Okay, so moving on.
So Laura, just a
Yes.
little bit of history. ADUs were brought to Orleans maybe 30 years ago or more. It was a special permit process pushed by a few people who actually were involved in affordable housing at the time. So in the case of those permits, they're filed with the special permit file because they needed a special permit. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, we allowed them to be built as a right. So there's a file in the zoning cases of the early ones, but it's unclear what the record is for the later ones.
Okay. All right, I'll add in zoning board of appeals files for the existing ones, but again, I think the expectation would be more that you're tracking this moving forward than trying to retroactively get a number. Okay, and then we have year-round rentals. which
Ward
could
Gorey
be-
has a question or comment.
Hi, Laura. Do I understand correctly there where it says the preservation of financially attainable year-round rentals? So that would actually change every year what that cutoff number was for what was financially attainable? I mean, financially attainable by whom and?
Yes, I think we had talked about that being 200% of the area median income.
Okay. So that would go up, at least you'd only be tracking one rather generous set of people.
Yes.
May I ask a question?
Oh, yes, Fran McLennan.
Laura, in terms of the preservation and the financially attainable rentals, the only thing that's under description is ADUs. And yet, wouldn't there be the potential for any number of other types of buildings that are for that attainable population?
Yes, so goal 4 actually has 3 separate metrics. One is ADUs, one is the overall number of year-round rentals of any type, and one is the time from site plan or special permit application to when that is approved by the approval authority, since that is related to the strategy for trying to audit your permit process and making sure it's very streamlined.
Great, thank you. Got it.
Okay. And I believe right now, most of these time-wise are, it's a mix of annual or biannual, depending on kind of how fast this data changes. And all of that is, I'm open to any of your suggestions for that. Goal 5, we're talking about housing stability. And so here I'm suggesting you basically get, once the funding has been allocated for it and you have a program established with either the Homeless Housing Assistance Corporation or the HECH, that, you know, I'm assuming you'd have some sort of grant agreement with them, and they probably provide you with some sort of report on how that grant funding is used, and you can probably use that report to try to get a sense of how many Orleans households were assisted with, you know, in a general sense, no specifics, but a general sense of how many households were assisted either with an emergency program or a longer-term rental assistance program. Goal 7 is where you're supporting first-time home buyers up to 200% of area median income. And there, it's once a program's established, in both of these cases, once or if, really, whether it's an Indeed style, in Vail Indeed style program, you could track the number of units in that program, or if there is a down payment assistance program done, you can either ask for a report from the organization helping you administer that program, or I suppose if it's a local program, you would have it in-house. But I'm assuming that you would be partnering with another housing organization to run that. So goal 8 is where you're fostering partnerships, and that is both public-private partnerships and so forth. And so you can just look at, you know, the amount of funding that was allocated to partner organizations or private-public partnership. You know, you'd have that in your town meeting warrant documents or your Community Preservation Act proposals. And similar to the planning staff, you would know how much and what you have for your planning department capacity, housing staff, and that you can just update that pretty simply once a year. And then amount of funding to the trust, you can track that from the annual report, and these are things that are already tracked, so it should be pretty straightforward. And then for engagement of the community, I suggest that you track the overall participation kind of as you go. If you're running a survey or you're having an event, you just try to track through sign-in sheets, or some things automatically track it for you, like surveys, if it's online. you can just aggregate all those together as sort of a points of participation metric, like we do sort of, because someone might do more than one thing. And that way you can get a sense of how you're reaching people, and depending on the platform, where that's appropriate or available, you could also track some demographic data, like in a survey that can be done anonymously. If it's just people in a forum, sometimes we ask them to volunteer that information. You might do the same. And just so you can see if you're reaching a proportionate representation of the community, and if there's any other groups that are underrepresented that you want to make a special, effort to get out or and get their feedback. So that is the first part of it before we actually get into the data indicators bit. Is there any questions or feedback on this portion of it?
Ward?
Yes, I had one question circling back to the production goal. And what snagged me was where it said that what would be counted would be single-family homes of less than 1,200 square feet. And that's a smaller home. Is that considered like a missing middle housing unit, or, wouldn't there be an interest if there were, a starter home created privately, or would it have to be 1,200 square feet or less? And I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
that is you're right, that's a somewhat flexible number. It's meant to capture a cottage, a cottage-sized home. And that's typically the number that's used, that or under, as a sort of cottage size, but not a tiny home, right, which is a whole other definition. So I think that was an interest that they maybe didn't want to exclude smaller single-family homes in the equation, but typically, you're right, missing middle tends to be maybe not considering single-family homes at all, but I think that's a point of discussion, whether you want to count very small single-family homes as a, if you were to say preserve that smaller home.
I guess
or
what I was having in mind was that if we're after this, if the production goal has the overall housing stock in mind, then if we're saying we need, more housing production, couldn't we be counting these? And I don't know how you would, it might be a sales price that would be attainable, but
Yeah, I think the case study that people had in mind were, if it were a small single-family home that, say, Habitat for Humanity helped partner to preserve and use, that, in the case that something, especially if it were deed restricted, that would be considered financially attainable, and it's a smaller model. But you're right, for the sheer production goal, I think your main focus is going to be on those multifamily unit models. But I think it was trying to be as inclusive as we could of something that could be considered financially attainable.
all right, well, we could maybe, make a judgment on that if that 1,200 square foot was just considered flexible.
Are there any other questions on the goal metric tracking?
Could I say one thing?
Marcia, go ahead.
Okay, keep in mind, again, this is the consultant's recommendation, because one of the questions that we talked about in the working group is, how do you know you're achieving your goal? So a lot of these goals had multiple strategies, some of which may work out or not, but there's this whole next phase in which the two committees with the staff are going to have to work out how to get to the strategies and whether they're viable or not, whether we have the resources or not. But at the point that you're going to pursue a strategy, you need to come up with some measures, because obviously people are going to say, how do you know when you've achieved your goal? So at that point, we're going to have to define very specifically, what's included and not, which is somewhat arbitrary, but unless you do that, you can't be consistent year after year. So there's a whole lot of work, taking the recommendation and then making it work for whatever the two committees decide are worth pursuing. So I think the point is, let's keep in mind these metrics, and let's see what works. So there's a lot of work in between that has to be done.
I'm sort of struck with the 1,200 square foot number. I believe that we have a warrant article that's being contemplated increasing the size of an ADU to 1,200. And now we're saying, well, we want the ADU, could be up to 1,200, but we had a single-family house that's more than 1,200 and doesn't qualify. And if we can't count the number of ADUs that we get every year, I'm sure we can't count whether it's 1,200 or 1,199 or 1,250. I mean, does it qualify as housing or doesn't it? It's where I come from.
Yeah, I think the main emphasis here, and maybe it needs to be reflected, I just realized that wording isn't in there. I think the financially attainable aspect of it, the year-round, both year-round is an important thing, and financially attainable is the second bit of that. So I think that ADUs are counted and listed as something that would count in the production goal. The size of a single-family home, or whether or not to even include single-family homes as counting as missing middle, I think is it's a policy decision that you can make. Maybe it's just deed restricted, single-family homes that count and not any other types.
Yes, Alexis.
I just have a question about the article that you just mentioned that might be created about increasing the size of an ADU to 1,200 square feet. Is that coming from the
Planning board.
planning board? Okay. Thank you.
Do we need to add something else to that, some other kind of housing, or what do you think? Just
Well,
leave the 1,200 out?
Well, I guess what Marcia's saying, this is from the consultant, and when we meet again in
Guess so.
January, we can decide what we really want to do.
I think there was some discussion about going for smaller lots, which implies smaller houses. So if that's the case, then you're going to have to define what counts. So it may be that single-family houses don't count at all, or only if you can ascertain deed restrictions, so this is yet to be decided what the exact definition is.
This goes back to, oops.
Go ahead,
This
Ward.
goes back to the wording of how we word the production goal. Because right now, the production goal says overall year-round housing units. And they could be
Yep.
these guys down the street from me, who are building big houses. That's a year-round housing. Maybe it's not year-round.
So the production goal, I believe, does say it's the missing middle housing typology. Though it's not just any, single-family home.
Maybe I'm looking at an old version.
Okay, Laura, move on.
You got the
All
latest
right,
she sent out?
moving on.
The latest? You got the latest
So
she sent out?
now we're looking at what you might be updating. This, I'm assuming, is going to be either a staff person or an intrepid subcommittee who would be updating this periodically. But these are some key data indicators, all of which we have and more in your data analysis report, but there's a subset of what we give you that will be good to keep tabs on at regular intervals. And we try to say here what the data indicator is, what the actual data source is, and then kind of how you would access that data. You can go right into the links to try to get at, the raw data source, and we try to provide this very specific title and of what, say, census table you would look at. But there are also these other resources that often will do some of the heavy lifting for you. They, whether it's even just Census Quick Facts or UMass Donahue Institute or the Mass Housing Partnership, Data Cape Cod, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. All of those are really good resources for having data that's already kind of aggregated for you. Some of them often might even output graphics for you or language. So there's, but the caveat to that is they are not going to be updated as quickly as, of course, the raw data. The raw data is available the moment it drops, whereas some of these other sources take some time to update their platforms. So either one is fine. I've provided also a tailored sort of Excel workbook for using the raw data to, whether you want to manually input it or whether you want to use a platform like Social Explorer that helps you export some of the census data more easily. So, and that would spit out a table, a graphic for you like you would have in your data analysis report that could be customized. So I tried to provide a wide range of options depending on, I wanted to make this very easy so even someone with not familiar or comfortable with using the data sources could get the information that you're looking for very quickly and easily. And then also give you the tools that if someone who is more comfortable with Excel or census data could also, get in there and look for something that's a little more customized and updated that way as well. So we have, for topics, we have year-round population, your population projections. That gets, year-round population can get updated, maybe it's every 2 or 3 years. I don't think it has to be every year, but you can update it more often if you want. Population projections are probably really more every 5 years that they seem to provide something new. Net new housing production by housing stock type, that's related to your housing production goals, so it's something you'll be wanting to get at anyway. And here we are reflecting that language again. So if there is, changes to that you want to make, be sure you make it here too. And then there's your annual household income, both in general and also by tenure, because, people who rent often make much less than people who own. And that could be annually, because can change quite quickly. Number of households is an annual metric, and the housing stock building type breakdown is something you could look at annually. So are you getting more multifamily units as opposed to single family homes and so forth? And then your year-round housing unit total, you could look at that every 2 to 3 years. I'm happy to make changes if you think you want to look at that a little more often. Housing units by tenure, so rental versus ownership breakdown. I've listed the census here for now, but I know that your own local records may be the go-to source once you have a rental registry, and or you can compare the two. But I also know that your building department's records and what they report to the census is pretty good, and not every town is pretty good. So hopefully that's also a good workaround in the meantime until that's up and running. Likewise for seasonal housing units, short-term rental units. So that we use a platform that you can use for free. Some of these also have pay options, but all of these should be free to use. But alternatively, again, with short-term rentals, you often may have your own rental registry data that you can use and or compare. Sometimes that can be kind of interesting to compare because you're hoping that everybody is registering with you, but who's supposed to, but you might get some surprises. And then the median sales price broken down by single family versus condo versus everything is something you can get from the Massachusetts Association of Realtors pretty easily, and that's some quick moving target, so that's an annual update. Same with monthly rental costs. That could be a tricky one. to get good data on. We tend to look at a couple of different sources, so we might look at the census data, but we also might look at actual, something like Rent-A-Meter website, or even just directly, if you know of specific apartment complexes in town, and there aren't a huge number of them, you can just look it up or ask. And then housing cost burden in general, and then sometimes it's helpful to look at that broken down in general, but also renters versus ownership and by income level. And some sources here for where to get that. That's kind of maybe every 2 to 3 years to give yourself a chance to hopefully see some shift in that. And the affordability gap by tenure is something that you can get either UMass Donahue kind of does it. I'm not suggesting you try to do this yourself. I think you just rely on, something like the UMass Donahue Institute or the MAPC. And so it's kind of one of these every 5 years, whenever they update it, you can get a sense of where that demand is and where the affordability is from their analysis. And then you have your residential development pipeline. So what's been permitted but not actually built yet. That's something your planning department can help you with. And your subsidized housing inventory, which is a little bit of an overlap with the earlier matrix as well. And your projected housing demand, similar to the affordability gap. It's kind of the most recent regional needs assessment that's going to have that analysis. So that's the gist of what we have for you. Are there any thoughts you have so far?
Questions, thoughts from anybody? Board?
Laura, I just want to thank you for taking seriously the wish that we expressed that there would be a way of tracking this. And I think certainly you've taken me beneath the waves of where I could swim originally. And as we mentioned, there may be a need for some kind of a small data group to get up to speed really, and then bring information to the trust and the committee as a whole. And that might be the people who will really have to sweat all these different sources. But I'm glad that you've tried to empower us to do this, and I think it'll take, pulling us by the nose a little bit to get there, but once we're there, we'll appreciate it.
Well, I appreciated this being a part of the scope of the project because I think that this is, like you said, it helps empower you to keep your plan up to date and adjust your policy decisions accordingly. So I think that's really smart. If we don't have any more questions on this piece, I'll pull up the production goal again, and maybe we can finalize what you think should go in the plan. So previously, we had 300 overall year-round housing units in the next 10 years. There was a couple of changes now. Originally, well, we did hear from the select board in particular, and also the working group, that there was an interest in also having, as a subset to the overall goal, a goal related to deed-restricted affordable units. So we originally had this written as 300 overall year-round housing units, and then 100 of which would be deed-restricted. But then there was an interest in maybe stretching that a little bit further as an aspirational goal to 350 overall year-round housing units, with 150 of those being deed-restricted affordable. And I've started to add in at the recommendation of Ward, which I thought was a great suggestion, a little description here as a best estimate with what we have from the data analysis report, how many households are in these different categories, and I can look at breaking this down a little bit by percentage as well in the final iteration, but just to give you some sense of the order of magnitude, and taking that with a grain of salt, knowing that this is a snap. There's some limits of the data, but it does give you a sense, I think, of the numbers.
Perhaps.
Warren.
Perhaps since I was the one who sent some information to you and it got incorporated in this, I'll try to explain what I was thinking. I mean, there was some interest and pressure about should we be more ambitious? Well, we've got a need that is much larger than this. Why are we playing our cards so safely? And, I've always found it useful not to overshoot in my goals, but to make goals that I thought I could make. And then if I'm doing really well, hallelujah, we expand the goal. So that is a good argument for being more conservative. But the argument that led me to think that maybe we could stretch it was that my understanding would be that the Governor Prince project is not included in the current numbers that we have, but would be included in this. And if you were to say that Governor Prince was even 60 units, and it could well be more, and we were to say that half of those were affordable, it's supposed to be the majority are affordable, then we would have, 30 more affordable and 60 more, overall towards our goal. And that's a significant jump, head start. I was calculating it, we would have, when Governor Prince came online at 60, we'd have 17% of the units that we needed for our 10-year goal. And when Governor Prince came online with 30 affordable units, we would have 20%, 30 out of the 150 we'd already have. So we've got those online, in a sense, and that gives us a little bit of a head start. That was what made me feel more comfortable with saying, well, what if we went to 350 and 150? And I think it's just a judgment call it's kind of a political call, really. How far should we push it?
Henry?
Yeah, so I'm going to counter that with, we're going to run into an inventory issue. We've had some big jumps, Penrose or Cape Cod 5, even the 14 at 107 Main Street, the 30/60. Those are the largest available properties in the town. So unless something drastically changes, we're talking about 2 here, 1 there, 3 there. Sure, second and third floors over CVS or whatever, apartments, but love to get there, but it's going to be smaller steps, I think, from here on out, unless there's some property I'm not aware of, or we build a second floor in Orleans.
Other thoughts? Katie?
Hi. I just wanted to comment on the last comment, which is when we set a goal of 100, what was that, 2018? We never thought we'd get there. And that was a 10-year goal. And we're about to obviously surpass that with what we have coming online in the next few years. So I think we should hope for the best and keep pushing forward, because a lot of the properties that came online, those big projects, Governor Prince and Cape Cod 5, we didn't know about when we set that 100 unit goal 10 years ago. So you never know what could happen.
Thank you, Katie. Other thoughts? Let me toss one in. I think that having a goal of 350 and 150 is a reasonable is it 150? Yes. 150 is a reasonable thing to have in the report. But we also need to think about how that relates to what's out there to finance this. So on the one hand, we know through town policy and actions, there's a potential for 1,200 additional dwelling units in downtown Orleans that can be built today under current zoning. But on the other hand, if you track projects on Cape Cod that have received low-income housing tax credits, my analysis over the last 3 or so years says the Cape gets about 100 low-income housing tax credit units a year. And then you say, well, how does Orleans relate to Cape Cod? 3% of the total population of Cape Cod resides in Orleans. So that says, okay, if there are 100 a year, maybe we might get 3 under existing funding cycle. Now, that doesn't say you don't give up the 350, because I agree with Katie. Set a goal and work towards it, and you never know what's going to happen. And I think that this is an overall housing goal, and what I think will happen is that as people realize that there are investment opportunities in downtown Orleans, we will begin to see additional housing built above the rate of housing that we have seen in the past 10 or 15 years. George says we get about 18 new dwelling units a year in Orleans. Plug that into 350 as well, and you've got to change the production cycle. So I'm not opposed personally to the goal, but I think we have to understand what we're driving against. There's a lot of things out there that may or may not help us. I think that Orleans has set the standard in some ways on Cape Cod with what we've done with the most recent 100 dwelling unit goal. People are impressed with what we've been able to do, and when we pull up Governor Prince, we're going to exceed that goal anyways by 50%. So just understand, goal is one thing, resources available is something else, and we have to keep that in mind. Bill.
Thanks. Yeah. I think the goal, when I look at it, is obviously the shortfall, which I think was closer to 650. And I do also think, to your point, I think it's important that we have a number that is realistically what we're trying to do based on our current resources. And maybe every year or two, that number hopefully increases. But that's kind of how I think we would best measure our progress, is sort of not the shortfall, the ultimate goal is the 650, but having a number, okay, this is, over 10 years, this is kind of what we really think we can do. And hopefully that changes, in a couple of years, but that's it.
Fran McLennan?
I think, too, that it's important to look at what people want for our town. And what we have heard is the importance of maintaining what is special about Orleans and the values that we have. And so I think we might ask ourselves, how many large apartment-type housing developments will be compatible with how Orleans residents wants our town to grow? And I think that, from what I understand from talking with people, is that there is a wish for smaller projects that are integrated into neighborhoods and become part of the fabric of Orleans, rather than having this apartment complex here, this apartment complex there. So to me, it's a social, political value that we should consider too. So I support this goal, and I think it is aspirational, because I think 1 and 2 here and 5 or 6 over there, it's going to take a lot of those to get to this goal, and certainly harder to get to something larger.
Do you feel that needs to be said anywhere, what you just said, in any of this, in terms of the, or is that just, do you feel like this needs to be part of any of that we do as we go forward talking about this? Or do you feel it should be in the goal itself? Or,
Well, that's an interesting question. I don't know whether that came up in
come up
Laura's.
several times, you know, in our discussions over the years. I don't know if it's reflected. I don't have the whole packet with me right now, but I'm thinking, because I actually think in terms of public perception, that is really important, because we have, as you said, we've just got some very large projects, and then it said, okay, 350 more. Well, what is more? And I think we really haven't, maybe that's part of our job when we start explaining this, but it's not contained anywhere in this report, I don't think. And I think it's actually, it could be an issue.
I think the goal is data-driven, as opposed to, I'll ask Laura this question. It appears to me that the goal is data-driven, but I think that taking into account what the input that people got in surveys and discussion groups hopefully is reflected or will be reflected in our report and in the goal as well. But I would ask Laura the question.
Yeah, so I think the number, that in terms of the number of the production goal is a combination of data-driven. You certainly cite some data sources of how we got to that number, but it's also, as you said, sort of policy associated, because if it was purely data-driven based on need, it would be a higher number, but that higher number is not really practical. I think that the concept of missing middle housing typologies is the one that is going to be important for the community to understand, because that is really trying to get at, the reason why we call it missing middle is because people, when they hear multifamily, automatically think of those larger apartment complexes. And we really want them to start thinking about more of the typologies that you were describing, these smaller, gentle density, units that are integrated into the fabric of the community. And maybe there are some slightly larger buildings, but it's a Cape Cod Orleans scale size of things. I think that it's an opportunity to maybe cross-reference the work that's starting to happen with your comprehensive plan update too. So, there could be some language in there of the production goal, or in the housing typology goal or something, where we say where it's consistent with, the vision of the comprehensive master plan or comprehensive plan update.
Henry?
Yeah, so I'd like to revisit what Fran says, because I've heard the same thing a lot. I think she's dead on. I don't know whether I agree or not. I don't know whether it's practical, but I think that's the feel from the community, for sure. The meetings I've gone. I also want to say that the meetings that I go to, it's a lot of the same people, and a lot of the same familiar faces. I recognize some of the clothes they're wearing. So the interesting, Laura, is that if that concept be integrated into the community, the single-family houses like the Habitat one and everything, what number does that produce? Because that's a lot different than what you just stated in the town area. What would you say, 12? There's enough inventory for 1,200 new units.